Hey everyone, Jeffrey Gardner here, and welcome to The Lost Bots, a series dedicated to all the unsung heroes out there fighting the good fight to protect our datas. Today we've got Mr. Alan Foster, Manager of Domain Engineers, on to discuss Insider Threat. But before we start talking about that, Alan, what is a Manager of Domain Engineers? That's a new one even for me. What do you do?
Hey, is that a trick question? No, I think that's fair. I manage domain engineers. I'm part of the emerging technology team. Um, my part of the team I manage, we focus on detection and response, and that includes managed detection and response. And we work really closely with the solutions engineering organization. And so we provide them the tools necessary. We enable them through training. We help them secure deals, whether it's their IDR deals and NDR deals. And so we also work really closely with product as well in the direction of where things are going. So that's what I do in a nutshell.
So you have a lot of free time and you don't wear a lot of hats. That's what I'm taking away from that is we need to find more for you to do at the end of the day.
Wait a second. Well, let me do this again. No, I'm just kidding.
No, man,
There's a
it's
lot of
good.
hats.
Yeah, it's good to have you on too. So, insider threat. So, I'm old. You can't tell, I know. It's just, I moisturize. But traditionally, insider threat would mean end users exfiltrating data or trying to play that role of hacker man, disrupting the business on their last day in some form or fashion. Does that, kind of old school definition still hold true today, or are we kind of missing the bigger picture with that?
Yeah, I think there's a misperception, maybe not a misperception, but maybe it's a term that's just thrown around flippantly. Like, yeah, insider threats. Yeah, that stuff happens. But when you really try to understand what insider threats really are, and yes, it's like it's not like somebody's playing hackerman. I think a lot of it is where you have a lot of users or end users that are just they're not knowledgeable about security and they make themselves vulnerable. If they make themselves vulnerable, it makes their organization vulnerable. And maybe a hacker man might come in and exploit that. But a lot of times it's just they're circumventing policies. They're not changing their passwords, or they have poor password management, hygiene, and things like that. And so a lot of things can occur from that. I was doing some internet searches and I was looking up in Wikipedia is like, what is insider threats? What does that really mean? And it's just essentially somebody that's within the organization. If you got somebody that's in the organization, they've skipped a couple of steps that somebody outside the organization would have to take, like social engineering or trying to phish somebody to get access. They're already there. And so you have different groups that can fall under that insider threat umbrella. And so you've got the malicious insiders, those that have the intent and capability to do some damage for some various reasons, whether if they're disgruntled or they're mad at the company, or maybe that's just what they do. Maybe they're it's part of their career, their criminal career, to go in there and steal data and sell it and just remain under the radar. And then you just have like I had mentioned earlier, the negligent insiders, which they just make a lot of errors, disregard policies, and that's how they place their organizations at risk.
So, you mentioned a couple different classes. One of the areas which I think has been highlighted over the last year, in terms of insider threat that maybe people don't necessarily think about, it's usually like, okay, it's going to be end users, like you mentioned, and maybe IT staff, and maybe security personnel. One of the areas that I now consider part of insider threat is going to be third parties that operate within our organization. So if you've got a third party service which helps with, remediating issues on laptops, or that help administer, databases, or some kind of, service with remote connectivity into your environment, technically by the definition of inside, they would be an insider threat. And therefore, a lot of those times as well, and this will dovetail right into my next question for you. A lot of times those insiders have privileges that the normal end users wouldn't possess. They have local admin rights, or they're, the owner of databases, so they can take certain actions on it. Just in terms of like damage, and this is just kind of like a thought question. which group of individuals do you think causes the most damage? Is it the end users with like strength in numbers, or is it those admins, third parties with elevated access? Maybe less in number, but the ability to cause damage is multiplied. So, I mean, in your own professional opinion, like which of those do you see actually causing the most damage?
Yeah, that could be a tough one depending on where you're coming from. Yeah, I have to pause and think about that one for a second. So I think it's a great question. It's something that people need to think about. Always going to have a lot more end users. Obviously, there's going to be a ton of them, and so therein lies the challenge in itself, is the number of people that you need to keep um, aligned to policy and aware of security. It's a full-time job. I mean, that's a lot of work. But then you have the IT personnel, the security, they're insiders too. It's anybody with authorized access, but they have like privileged access. I mean, they can get into a lot of stuff. And so you get one disgruntled guy says, hey, pack up your stuff, you're leaving tomorrow. But you have one day to work and finish up. They can do a lot of stuff. It's like, well, I'm going to leave them a little present when I leave, and drop a logic bomb and do a lot of damage that way. But that's probably not as common, even though they do happen and it causes a lot of damage. But I think it'll cause a lot of damage in the short term, right? When it comes to your regular end users, the sheer number over probably a long period of time, it will probably culminate to a lot more damage. I don't have hard numbers, so it's very subjective. I don't know if this is a trick question, if I pass or not, but that's what I think.
Might be
C minus. Okay.
No. I mean, you're thinking pretty much along the same way that I am. So the way that I've kind of approached it in past lives is, the IT staff herding cats. I'm sure everybody's heard the analogy and laughs every time that they hear it, but there's less cats to herd, within your IT staff. And traditionally, they're going to be more accommodating, to some of the controls that you may want to put in place, just because of form and function and nature of their duties. Going out to file sharing sites, going out to Reddit, doing stuff like that. Sure, they enjoy it, but trying to take something like that away from someone on like a social media team because it's bad, or someone from marketing who takes 5 minutes and goes on a break and likes to go on the forums and chat, or talk about cats, watch cat videos, whatever it may be. It's going to be a lot easier to work with the IT staff than it is with the end users. And you're correct that just math is, and I love the way your video paused because that was just an insanely comedic face you were making for about 30 seconds. But pure numbers, just math, probability at the end of the day. Like you said, end users, if you got 10,000 users in your company, if only 5% are not even doing it negligently, they're just doing things, that's still 10%, making sure my math is right. 10%, 1,000, 5%, you got 500 users at the end of the day that are unwittingly exposing company data, company secrets, sharing stuff with their personal Gmail, or checking their company account from an unauthorized computer, whatever it may be. They're not doing it to purposefully hurt you. It's just something that happens. The likelihood of damage actually occurring within that group of people, it's just like an external attack surface versus an internal attack surface. Yeah. Like, if someone gets inside of your data center, they're going to be able to wreak havoc because that's where all your data is. But are the number of attacks inside versus outside? It's not even a comparison. They're orders of magnitude higher because just attack surface users is larger than IT.
Yeah, just to add on to that, not to throw you off your game or anything, but like I was looking for the word, and attack surface was exactly it. It's such a broader attack surface, and it's really buzzy. I like it, but it's such a broader attack surface when it comes to end users, and I think that's why there's people need to really focus on the people aspect of it.
100%. So we've talked about what it is, where it's coming from. If there were kind of like a top, now we're going to do like a list of the top 10, but if there's like a list of the top 2 things that an organization could do to prevent insider threat, in your mind, and I see the wheels turning already, what would they be? Top two.
Yep. Okay, so when I think of just the easiest and simplest things anybody can do, right? People think like, oh, you have to have the latest technology and behavior analytics, and it's that's a part of it, right? But the simplest thing that somebody can do, and everybody's heard it, it's password management. Meaning you manage that type of hygiene, it's going to make a huge impact in helping with anything, with breaches and giving somebody unauthorized access where they can go in and do more damage. So you got somebody who's managing password, a good password management program. It's a rotational program, making difficult passwords on a regular basis. You're going to see significant increase in security posture just for doing something that simple. And then you've got multi-factor authentication. Again, it's a simple thing you can do, but it makes a huge impact when it comes to security. Um, and then we can think about privileged access as well, giving somebody enough access for them to do their job, nothing more, nothing less. Because if they are compromised, that's damage control. It's at least going to be limited, and hopefully by that time, with good visibility in place, the security team will know something's happening. They can contain it as quickly as possible and respond appropriately. But yeah, the philosophy or the idea of least privilege is also very important, which I think is connected with whole account management and password management. But I'd say those are some really simple things organizations can do that would help significantly without having to get like a ton of high tech and fancy security tools, because that's not going to do the work for you. I mean, it's the people aspect of it, right. I've heard it said like people are the most important assets in an organization, but they can also be the biggest risks. And so when you change that behavior and get them in the right mindset, when it comes to part of our job is also security, whether we're on the security team or not. We're here to help protect that organization as well. Sorry, long answer.
No. Long but good. So I'll piggyback on yours. I'll take a different track. So the first thing that I would say is effective policies. And what I mean by effective policies is, the first rush is to go in and make the policies super restrictive as humanly possible. Like we're just going to deny all, allow by exception. But then the problem is you're running into you're going to have a lot of exceptions. And as soon as you start making those exceptions, equate that to chinks in the armor, people are going to see that exceptions are being made. So, hey, you made an exception for A. Why can't you make an exception for B? And there's going to be hurt feelings, and the voices are going to grow louder and louder, as opposed to if you actually sit down, speak with the business leaders, speak with the user base, craft policies that actually makes sense for your organization. They may be shorter, they may not be as definitive, but you can always add to that as opposed to having to, make chinks in that armor. In my head, that's a better strategy to go. Users will end up happier. Just everybody will be, cats and dogs living together, pandemonium, all that good stuff. My second recommendation would be to, kind of increase transparency among the groups that you have in your organization. So one of the old, things that I actually got asked, is, okay, so security watches everybody and everything. Who watches security? And that's not to say that they need to have access to all of our tools 24/7, be able to look at what we're doing at any given time, but just establish a process wherein, they can request access to audit logs if they see something going on, or just voluntarily share that with someone in IT leadership, just to increase the ability for us to share that information. Because short of, like you said, my ideal scenario would be to have analytics on everything, analyzing IT behavior, making sure that, if this admin's never logged into this server before and all of a sudden they're escalating privileges and they're doing weird stuff, like I want analytics all over the place. But I realize that's process heavy. Again, that may be expensive for some organizations. An easy place is to increase the eyes on some of these logs, and maybe even have a neutral third party. Like if you're not comfortable giving IT access to some of this data, if you've got a governance and compliance committee, maybe let them request access and do periodic audits on, things that are happening within your privilege management solution or other things. But just, it's not necessarily, transparency in this instance is not necessarily a bad thing if you manage it properly.
It almost sounds like you're a CISO in your past life.
Almost sounds like it. It's that never-ending trade-off, man, of security and availability, and it will go on forever. But yeah, I'm one of the people who, initially wants to go deny everything, allow by exception, and that's how I started off my career. But some organizations, if especially if you have to, deal with federal frameworks and CMMC, that's easier to get by because you could say, hey, our contracts require that we, lock everything down in this manner. But if you're just a normal operating, organization and you don't have those standards to point to, it's just going to make you come off as the bad guy when you're supposed to be the guy that they turn to. You're supposed to be the good guy, the consultant. It's going to make you out to be that law dog image that we're trying to get away from in general as security, and be more of that consultative, not necessarily handholding, but we're partners in this with you. We're not going to say no, but we're going to say, all right, so let's figure out what you really want to do, and then let's help you do it securely, which is where I think a lot of the insider risk comes from, because we lock things down to a certain degree and then they find ways around it. Whereas if we worked with them and we're like, okay, so what's the end goal? And then work with them to make that a secure process, you're not going to have, they're not going to try and get around things and detonate logic bombs or do weird stuff, because they're able to do their jobs and they're happy.
Yeah, I think that's a really important part of it, is involving them, their buy-in, and where you both align on that, what those expectations are and why they're really important. But yeah, that's great.
So cool, man. Well, we've arrived at the end point. So to kind of summarize things up, insider threats evolved over the years in, scope and nature. And I think the pandemic has only seemed to accelerate it even further. Hopefully our discussion today has given you some things to think about, and some avenues to explore and combat said threat. Very special thanks to you, Alan, for joining us. And thank you to everyone else for tuning in. If you like this series and you want to see it grow, remember to share it out to your networks, tweet, gram, retweet, TikTok, Vine. I think people still Vine. I may be showing my age. Are people still Vining? I don't know. But if you're watching this on YouTube and you have ideas for topics you'd like us to cover in future episodes, please let us know in the comment section below. And I hope you all have a great day. Take care, everyone.